Hello, welcome everybody. We are here for Beyond the Device, Transforming Data into Human Connections, the Data Center webinar. Today, this webinar is brought to you by the Data Center, myself, Carmen Waukesha, and also in the room with me is Orchid Richardson, VP and Managing Director of the Data Center. Today, we are using BlueJeans, and there's a few instructions for you if you're on this line as an attendee. If you look on the right side of your screen, there is sort of a menu bar. If you are having technical difficulties and need to communicate with the moderator, myself, you can press the button that looks like a person with a speech bubble. And if you would like to ask any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature below. With us here today presenting are Benny Pang and Sagi Abiri. Benny Pang serves as IgnitionOne's VP of Display Products, where he is focused on making marketers' data actionable within real-time media channels, such as programmatic display and on-site personalization. Prior to IgnitionOne, Benny spent 8+ years optimizing web conversion purchase funnels on the direct-to-consumer business at Equifax. Sagi Abiri is the head of data solutions at StartApp and a global data and media company. At StartApp, Sagi is focused on developing, executing, and monetizing the company's data products across various verticals, such as advertising, financial services, insurance, fraud, and compliance. Prior to StartApp, Sagi ran a quantitative finance startup, and prior to that, served as vice president of media and advertising at Neustar. Today, StartApp and IgnitionOne will be discussing how marketers should look beyond the individual data element or device and speak to customers holistically in order to build better human connections. Sagi will explain how evaluating audiences with multiple signals gives a better understanding of your audiences, and Benny will cover how these data signals combined with real-time ID resolution scoring and a messaging engine creates more personalized human conversations.
Fantastic. So let's begin. Thank you, Carmen. We wanted to thank the IAB for giving us this opportunity. And of course, all of you that joined us today. As Carmen mentioned, my name is Sagi Abiri. I'm the head of data solution here at StartApp. And I will discuss how at StartApp we turn data or hard data into a human understanding. Following me, Benny, who's the VP Display Products at IgnitionOne, will discuss the additional parts of the workflow and how IgnitionOne is helping turning the data into the human connections. So before I do that, I wanted to spend a really short time discussing StartApp just to build some credibility to the story, understand and explain how we got all the data that we have. The company itself was founded in 2010, really as a way for app developer to monetize on their apps. So imagine that you are a great game developer, you build the next version of Tetris, and you're trying to make some money out of it. You put it on the App Store, and you're going to get very little dollars against that app simply because there are so many apps and it's hard to get discovered. What you could do is you can download our SDK in a self-serve way and then turn your app into an advertising real estate for us, where we work with our agencies and brands and push messages to the app developers and also share the revenue with them. Fast forward to today, that was about 8 years ago. Fast forward to today, we sit on about 425,000 different apps. We see about 1.5 billion unique active users every month. And for those users, we collect multiple types of data, anywhere from location to apps on device and Android to everything on the carrier of the device to agent gender, et cetera. And I'll go about this in a few minutes. So that's a little bit about the company. Let's move on to the point that we wanted to talk to you about today, which is the challenge that there's a lot of access, and when you think about it, almost too much access today. One of the biggest issues when I talk to my customers today, it is not the scarcity of data or channels or devices or technique, but it's actually the abundance. The fact that the advertising ecosystem is extremely fragmented with lots of moving pieces, and there's a lot of each. In a way, it's hard to see the forest for the trees, or say differently, it's hard to see the person out of the mechanics, because there are so many things to work with. Going to move to the next slide quickly. What we have today is we really have more people on smartphones and computers than ever before, more data on users than ever before. When we think about the models, the algorithm, the AI, machine learning, all the buzzwords that you're familiar with, they're stronger than ever before. And at the same time, we have thousands of purpose-built companies that are constantly closing the gaps in the ecosystem. That is the current status quo. That being said, it is still that the digital marketing is really not living up to its original promise. I was fortunate enough to be here in the early days of this market. And at this point, we would have thought that we will have targeted data delivered to the right person at the right time, on the right device, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You all have heard it, but actually nothing could be farther from the truth. When you look on the right side of this slide, and this is something that I pulled for a few vendors, that if you log into their system that lets you read which segments you are connected to based on your ID or your cookie, you can see that me, Stagia Abiri, at the same time, I'm a female head of household, I'm a male head of household. I'm a baby boomer, I'm an elderly, and I'm a Gen X. At the same time, I'm a current student, but also a graduate degree. And my total household income is between 0 to 15, 30 to 40, 75 to 100, 125 to 150, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So clearly, I'm getting messages that are all over the place, despite me being the same person. And this is not cross-device, this is simply on my computer looking at my web cookies. So let's move on and try to understand why this is the case, why this is happening. And the challenge really is that today, the way that audience is mostly being built are either retroactive, looking backward, they're very limited in scale, they're fragmented in the sense that some of the audiences are built based on 1 or 2 data points, and they're mostly circumstantial. So here are 4 examples that you can go and buy right now. I'm not saying that those are all the providers, but those are definitely available out there. So for example, let's look at Walmart. I can be a Walmart user for the advertising world, even if I am at the Walmart parking lot. Or I could be at Kim's Deli across the parking lot, but because GPS is not extremely accurate, I would still be considered a Walmart user, which is obviously not true. And there's also a question of frequency. How many times do I need to be at Walmart? It could be that only a few times at the parking lot of Starbucks across Walmart is enough to be a Walmart user. Similarly, I could be considered as a Starbucks customer simply because I downloaded the app 12 months ago. True story, I downloaded the app. I was interested in looking at the payment mechanism the Starbucks had. I haven't been to a Starbucks since, but I'm being targeted as a Starbucks user because I am on somebody's list as an app installed for Starbucks. BMW, I could be a potential BMW customer because I bought a BMW in the past. The fact that I had 3 children since, that I moved to New York City, that I changed job, that I had life cycle events that will not let me buy a BMW going forward is probably not taking into consideration. I'm still getting a lot of BMW messages. Similarly, I could be considered a male 18 to 24 because at some point on the point of sale data, somebody logged me as an 18 to 24 male, although the device that I've given, I already given it to my niece. So she's using the device, although the data that's associated with this device is not accurate. At best, this is ineffective. At worst, this could have legal implications because if you're starting to target people under 13 years old, thinking that they're male over 18, you can get into some troubles. So what do we do here? How do we think about solving this issue? And really, this is the thesis of startup, but I want to share this with you and try to see how we can make the entire ecosystem work with the same approach. And we call it the multi-signal approach, where we look at multiple data points and trying to determine who the user is. So it is not enough to have a single data point. It is not enough to have just the point of sale or just the location or just the app. You got to have multiple data points in order to understand the human behind the device, be it a desktop or a mobile phone. So some of the signals that we're looking here at Startup are signals like device, the make, the model, the operating system, the carrier, the roaming flags, the location, the apps, some social graphs, demographics, and behavior. And we try to pull it together and understand the human. I'll give you a couple of examples of how it really works. So here is just 3 examples to kind of, again, try to understand the person behind the data. We're not targeting a data point, we're understanding a person. So to be considered an Hispanic, it is not enough to reside in an area highly populated by Hispanics, which is some of the ways that it's done today. It is not enough to have an operating system in Spanish. You really got to have the keyboard or the device in Spanish. You got to have apps that are over-indexed to Spanish speaker, like Univision, Telemundo, Mi Latina. And you need to reside in an area populated by Hispanics. And by having all of those, then yes, you check the box, you are likely to be part of the Hispanic community. Similarly with the college student, age is not enough. You need to spend significant time on campuses, and you can see that through location or through Wi-Fi. Most of the universities have their own Wi-Fi, which is pretty easy to identify. And you should also have some installed apps that are associated with college students. And similarly, hotel loyalist. You can have a reward app, a Marriott, a Hilton, or SPG, but we also need to see you connected to the hotel Wi-Fi for more than X times over a period, and that X time could be defined by the customer, as well as the GPS. You can also overlay it with business segment to generate the business hotel loyalist. But this is the way that we're thinking about segments. This is the way that our entire taxonomy is built. And at the end of this short presentation, I'll give you a case study. But this is really what I wanted to share with you. The benefits are many. Obviously, you're getting highly targeted audience with greater certainty about the audience. The downside of this approach, truth be told, is that there could be some scale issues. The more audiences, the more constraints that you put on the audience, the lower the number of users that you could have. And that's why you probably want to go with users or companies that have massive scale, like ourselves and like some others. Another interesting benefit is the ability to create effective lookalike audiences. And the concept there is when you have multiple data points that you can play with, the lookalike audience could be broader and more flexible than just trying to look alike over 1 or 2 characteristics. The third benefit that we see a lot is the omnipresence. And the point here, and I think Benny will talk about this in his part of the presentation, is by understanding the person, regardless of which device you understood the person from, you can carry it across channels. So understanding that somebody is an hotel loyalist by using the mobile device is relevant even in his desktop environment, even in his direct marketing environment. The person at the end of the day is the person, and it carries across. So looking at multiple signals actually help you understand a person, and that helps to that. And the other fourth benefit that we see here is that the process of identifying the human is a recurring process. Often we start with an understanding of a person. We do A/B testing as we target, and we realize that one of the subsegments has performed better than the other. And then we're constantly iterating. And again, the more data that you have to iterate with, the better the effectiveness at the end of the day, because you can really tweak multiple coefficients and not just one coefficient. So those are the benefits. I would say the downside, although I don't have a slide on this, is like I said, one is definitely scale. You've got to make sure that you work with companies that have a lot of scale. And the other one is the complexity. There is something to said about simplicity, and by putting multiple data sets and multiple data feeds, especially 30 or 30 something, you want to make sure that you are still able to target the right person and you're not getting into a statistical coefficient that might lead you to the wrong direction. So this is really, in a nutshell, a few words about the multi-channel approach that we take here at StartApp. And I just wanted to finish really quickly with a case study. The case study was for an online e-commerce company. And they actually had an interesting problem where they wanted to acquire new users on a cost per lead while maintaining overall volume. And the reason that I'm saying it was an interesting problem was because for them to be considered as a lead, somebody had to fill a form. So if you look all the way to the right side of the screen, that is the form that had to be filled on the mobile phone, which is not easy to achieve. So the way that we approached that, initially we got a small number, about 50,000 users from them, and we look at the commonalities of those users. We were able to see 50% of them on our system independently. We're able to match that. And then we looked again at multiple different signals, anywhere from the interests of those people that could be not related to real estate at all, to apps that they had in common, such as streaming music, and I'll explain all that in a second. We looked at their demographics, at their age, at life cycle events, and we also looked at their location. And that profile that we're able to build turned out to be really successful. So at the end of the day, it turned out that we're looking for people between the ages of 24 to 45 that had moved, or that we can see through some of the apps that they just downloaded that they are in the market for real estate. So they downloaded a Zillow or Redfin or something along those lines that get indicated are starting to look into the market. Those were people that, again, from other apps that we look, like streaming music and video streaming, that are very comfortable with the digital life, and as a result will be probably likely to fill an online form and try to connect with the real estate on their mobile device. And the location, of course, we applied the location on the areas that we were interested in, and also we applied it on certain days of the week for movement, because we do know that, for example, in New York, open house day is on a Sunday. So we pulled all of those together, and we came up with quite an effective audience. But again, just like we always do, we tested an A, B, C, D type of testing, and we realized that subsegment or some of the coefficients for some of those tend to result in a higher conversion than the rest, and we constantly kept tweaking this campaign that ran for a couple of weeks. And the results were actually quite good. We saw about 179% increase in post-install events, which basically means form submission, which is fantastic. And at the same time, we lowered the cost per form submitted by 2/3 almost, by 65%. So again, that is a very successful campaign where we're able to look at multiple signals. And the reason that we like to use this case study, again, because the KPI is form submission, which is something that's really hard to do on a mobile phone. So yeah, that's a bit about us. That's a little bit about StartApp, the multi-signal approach. And just as a way for a segue, our data is available on multiple platforms on our ad network, but as well as from technology partners, such as IgnitionOne. And now I'd like to ask Benny from IgnitionOne to join me and discuss what it is that IgnitionOne does when the data is ready to complete the workflow, and actually complete the human connection. So thank you all. We're available for questions later. Benny, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Agi. This is Benny with IgnitionOne. How's everyone doing today? So just before we start, just a little bit about IgnitionOne. We are a global ad tech company enabling marketers to understand and engage with their customers in real time across multiple media channels. We have over 325 employees globally, helping over 500 marketers engage their customers and maximizing the returns in over $60 billion in media spend last year. We also work with, sorry, my slides kind of jumped around. Work with some of the top global brands, ranging from auto, travel to retail verticals. And some of those brands are there. But back to the conversation. So Sagi mentioned we live in a world where there's tons of data, and the reason why there's tons of data out there is there's opportunities to engage with your customers in multiple channels, and within each of those channels there's multiple platforms, and in each of those platforms view individual users by a cookie ID or device ID. It's a cookie world and device ID world. So all this data is being collected via multiple IDs, multiple devices, through multiple platforms and multiple channels, and someone has to kind of sort through that and make sense of it. But in reality, what happens is marketers end up splitting up this activity across different teams or media channel management. So a team that's working on one channel, like in display, or one channel in email, and so on, start optimizing based on their budgets and KPIs and performance, and start rearranging the messaging within the results of that platform or channel. And that optimization happens in a silo, and it's singular, it doesn't get shared. So what ends up happening is, from an end user, you get these fragmented interactions. Fragmented interactions. So either the user, depending on if the platforms track the user through a device ID, the user could be just seeing a message only on one channel, or the opposite is they're seeing the same message bombarded over, across all the channels they're engaging with. And since these optimizations and these data signals aren't being shared amongst them, you're just repeating the same message across different channels, almost wasted media spend. So how do you take this and elevate that? So you want to elevate these fragmented interactions and build a conversation. So by building the conversation, now you're able to kind of sequence your engagements with them across these different channels, and you have the opportunity to build up your value prop or your product or brand across the different messages, versus trying to cram all your message into one or two frames within the single second opportunities you have with them in one particular media channel. And then as you're having these longer engagements, you should have a two-way dialogue with customers. And when I say dialogue, I don't mean like you're waiting for customers to kind of respond back to you at spoken dialogue, but you're kind of observing in real time the behaviors and events and the engagements of the creative that you present to them, and feed that back into your intelligence of the customer. So you should constantly revise and personalize the conversation with them, just like in a real life human interaction. When you're meeting with someone new, you learn their likes and dislikes, and you start adjusting the conversation based off those the data points that you start collecting throughout that conversation, in order to build that deeper connection with them. And then finally, you should continue this conversation and build that long-term relationship with them. The conversation doesn't have to stop once they've converted and make a purchase. You want to build those higher value customers, longer-term lifetime customers, by continuing that conversation. You should talk about supporting the brand or supporting other products that they may be interested in. And hopefully these customers become brand ambassadors or product ambassadors for you. You've invested so much time finding the right customers and engaging them in the right channels, and kind of personalizing this conversation based off all this data. It'd be unfortunate to kind of end the relationship prematurely. So how do you do these conversations? How do you actually implement these conversations with online media? I think three of the most important things to kind of have this in place, or to have this conversation, is to really understand the ID resolution. So again, back to, in the world of cookies and device IDs and different platforms and channels, because all these are being managed in different platforms, those are typically seen as individual users, targeted users. At IgnitionOne, we kind of want to speak to them as customers, which is a resolved customer which span multiple devices, targetable devices across different channels. And ID resolution sits in the middle of all of that. And then back to the two-way dialogue, you want this data to constantly feed in real time to kind of continuously personalize your engagements with that particular customer. And to kind of generate these personalized messages across these engagements, you have to have a dynamic creative engine to kind of present the right message at the right time per that engagement channel. So I mentioned customer, and the way that IgnitionOne sees the customer is we put customer in the middle. There's different things that we learn about the customers through optimization, through the data collection. We do the attribution around customer. With data science, we data model it. But the two I'm going to focus on today is, again, the ID resolution component of it, and the IgnitionOne score, which we create this value on all the data that we've collected and processed per that customer across all their different devices, and create a single valued score that you can easily use to kind of customize your messaging, or even optimize your media spend across your different platforms that you're spending media on. And for customer intelligence to be effective, this is how it kind of sits along amongst our overall IgnitionOne platform. So we collect all these different data points from first, second, and third party sources, and then power all this customer intelligence in the middle and make this all actionable through our different engagements plugged into our engagement manager. And we kind of see, we have both native and partner engagements. So these data points are going to be actionable across display, search, social, and email. But we do have our native tech stack that we have that we can also run. Doesn't mean that it's limited to these actionable native channels, but yeah, so you want to make this data actionable through as many engagement opportunities as possible, because you want to reach these people where they're going to be engaging with their devices across different media channels. So how do we see ID resolution? So I mentioned before, it's a world of different IDs by platform and device IDs. We start combining and merging all these different identifiers together through our ID resolution graph. And this is done through probabilistic and deterministic matches. Probabilistic is, we looked at different indicators and events that provide a high likelihood that there's an association between two different devices that can be inferred. And then within deterministic, it involves observing some sort of logged in or purchasing event. Both of these types of matching types are done through our proprietary technology, as well as with partner technologies like Drawbridge and LiveRamp that we kind of combine and merge into this standalone ID resolution service. IgnitionOne is also part of the Advertising ID Consortium. So we see this ID resolution service as an augmentation to the industry initiative to kind of move to a more shared ecosystem of open IDs as that adoption starts continuing to grow. And the ID resolution service not only helps on finding the customers in the middle, sorry, there's like engaging with customers by across different devices, but you can also use this service to kind of view how the performance was across different devices through attribution and path to conversion views. So the IgnitionOne score, again, there's so much data out there. There's thousands of different data sources. So how does marketers make sense of all the different data? IgnitionOne creates a instant value in real time. Our data science team does feature selections across all the different data points, trains the different models and tests the different models to run through, and in real time generates a score that creates a propensity for that customer for a brand or a marketer. So I'm going to quickly show you a quick demo of how that actually looks in real time. So what we're looking at is in real time, these are visitors currently on one of our clients. This is Motel 6. So as you can see, as we're evaluating all the data points that we're collecting for those users, you can see how their interests kind of change over time just based on the behaviors that we're recognizing. So the bubbles kind of move from interest segments like motels to booking room. And as their scores grow or their propensity or the value starts growing, their bubbles get larger and larger. And again, this is being calculated in real time. And if you click on them, you can kind of see historically how we've seen their engagements across different channels, as well as their scores kind of changing over time based off these types of events and tracking. Sorry, I'm jumping back to the deck. All right, so now that you have all these different data points, fragmented interactions because of the different device IDs, and you're connecting them all together through ID resolution, then you've kind of created a value with IgnitionOne score just to help digest all the different data points out there for all these different IDs. You start personalizing your message. And you can personalize your message by either sequencing them across these different channels. But in addition to the sequencing of the messages, you can also do additional personalization, such as individual styling. So as individuals, you may have a preferences between colors, fonts, language spoken, and the products preferred. So those are the type of individual preferences that can be applied cross-channel. And then in addition to that, you have contextual relevance data points that you can also overlay into those messages as well, including weather, content, device, time, events, and location. And so for the example of weather for like Motel 6, based off the local weather forecast, you can kind of personalize your messaging around the types of vacation that your customer may be interested in. Again, this should be shared across all your different channels so that you can engage them in the similar message. And then some of the other things like location or your preferences for events, you should try to streamline some of your conversion funnels by pre-populating some of these events in your actual message. So it doesn't require your customer clicking on it and doing some additional research on site versus you're upfront letting them know what the upcoming games, sports games are or shows, so that once they select it, you're just going to a more streamlined conversion funnel. So I'm going to run through quickly some case studies that we've done with IgnitionOne. So Orca is an global auto parts company. They were looking to streamline all their media activity across multiple channels, and they use IgnitionOne to kind of help power and consolidate or centralize those audiences and power them through a single platform. They did see an 83% higher return on investment. And then we also worked with an iconic global auto brand that was looking to increase or lead to sale conversions. So IgnitionOne uses this score to kind of create a value on their customers and then generate these leads for them. But these leads obviously don't mean anything until they actually purchase the vehicle. So we actually layered on additional engagement channels and coordinated these engagement messages across to help ensure that the lead to sale conversions were completed. So that effort kind of led to a 100% increase in lead to sale conversions. And then Extended Stay is using the IgnitionOne score to power through their different media channels and optimizing their activities around those media channels. And using the score on their audiences, they're able to outbid some of their online travel agencies for more direct bookings, and they saw over 400% higher click-to-conversion rate based off the IgnitionOne score. Same thing with the New York Yankees. You saw over 100% of incremental conversions. And then finally on T-Mobile, they're looking to personalize the message further in the conversation. And we were able to customize those individual interactions with customers based off their interests. And they saw over 5,000 more clicks per day, 20% conversion rate. So yeah, it's back to like the importance of the conversation is making sure that you're linking all your different fragmented interactions together and using the data that you're collecting on each of these individual data devices and combining them into customer intelligence, empowering your conversation in real time and personalizing the messages with those customers. So I guess we'll take some questions. Sagi, if you can see those questions on your end, we can feel free to answer some of them.
Sure. So let me, we can see the questions. So if you guys have any additional questions, definitely please put them on. Let me start with a couple of questions, and then Benny, I think there are a couple of questions here for IgnitionOne. So you can take off. So one of the questions that we are getting asked a lot, again, back on the data side and pulling the fragmented pieces of data into one, is how do you collect demo data from a mobile device? Because you can collect a lot of interesting information from a device, the carrier, the service, et cetera, et cetera. But demo, it's not something that is easy to identify with 75% plus accuracy. And the way that we do it, and again, I just want to highlight because we do get asked this a lot, is that in addition to the SDK that sits on the device, we also have direct integration with about 400 apps. where our dating apps, social apps, messaging apps that are delivering self-declared age and gender to us. And then for about 100 and 160 million, we have self-declared age and gender, which we validate with third-party certification. Because we do know that even if it's self-declared, looking at gender is something that people tend to be more accurate about on dating and social website, but age is something that's pretty fluid. So we verify it first, and then we model it out to the rest of the population, and then verify it again. So all the elements that are related to demographics are coming initially from self-declared. So that's the answer to this question. I hope it suffices. And then, Benny, do you want to take the two additional questions here on the top for IgnitionOne? Yeah.
So I had a question for how accurate is the ID resolution process? So the thing about the ID resolution process, it's connecting inferred signals of different devices together. Obviously, you want that to be 100% accurate or as close as 100% as you can. But there are going to be instances, especially on the probabilistic side, that it's not going to be 100%. But that's okay, because even if you target those people, let's say if it's a device that wasn't, maybe it's 20% connection to this other device you're trying to target or a customer you're trying to target, because the real-time dynamic creative is going to be presented and rendered at the individual level. If that wasn't your intended device, based off the profile information that we have on that individual device, we would only present, messaging or products for that 20%. So you wouldn't be sharing, let's say you're trying to target customer A, but then you end up getting customer B. The message would still be rendered in real time for customer B once it comes up. And then the other question was, are you able to implement dynamic creative optimization off the data points collected in IDR? Yes, so the IDR, it connects the different device IDs and identifiers so that dynamic creative can look and process the different profile information across those different devices. So back to the example of like the weather creative, if we've located them into Miami and they're seeing summer weather, and then we see a similar device on the home computer, we'd present a similar summer beach vacation message for that particular customer.
Cool. And then I'm gonna just answer additional question from here about again going back to the data and the cross-device. Is data that's collected from mobile devices only relevant for in-app, or is it something that could truly be targeted across devices? And that is a very good question, because we do know that some activities, some actions are not translating well outside of mobile device. And similarly, some actions that you would like to do in a desktop, like registration or other things, don't translate really well to the mobile device. But in general, what we've seen is that in most of the time, information that is gleaned from the mobile device, because the mobile device at the end of the day is the representation of your own personality. I mean, just each one of you look at your mobile device, your cell phone, and you would know what things identify you. And if you're able to really get that and glean that, then that's something that is representative of who you are. And then, yes, you can take it across the devices with the realization that certain devices are more relevant for certain actions than others. But as a whole, yes, information that's going through a mobile device could be carried to desktops, direct mail, and others. So I hope this answered that question.
The other question I see is, how does IgnitionOne connect with different engagement channels or platforms? So through the engagement manager, we actually have different ways of integrating with other platforms. The most simplest way is tag firing. So we can fire different customer and audience segments or customer data into other platforms by firing their platform-specific pixels or cookies. Tags. And then the other more directly integrated versions is actually doing server-to-server types of integration or streaming data integrations. Depending on the partner, depending on the channel, we have different ways of connecting to each engagement platform. But our goal for IgnitionOne is obviously we want to position the marketer to be in every engagement opportunity as possible with their customers. So we're definitely connecting that data to as many platforms and channels as possible for marketers to be part of that conversation.
And Benny, I see there's one more question. So let me just answer one more question, and then you can jump with the latest one. So similar question, how do you find the startup data and how do you work with it? Very similar to Benny, you can find us on multiple DSPs or DMPs, or you can reach out to me directly. The email at the bottom of the slide is actually, there's missing an I, so it's sagi.abiri@startup.com. But DMP, DSP, email me, and we'll get you going. And Benny, I see one more question for IgnitionOne.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at it right now. There was a follow-up answer to the probabilistic question. So just a follow-up, just to elaborate on what I was explaining versus a 20% linkage. I guess part of it too is the IgnitionOne ID resolution service does have this propensity, since you're combining with the score, that 20%, you can also use that to customize the message. So if that link isn't as strong as you'd like it to be or think it is, the message can definitely be toned down a little bit versus the more direct, like, hey customer, you did this, so did this type of message, or sequentially. But this, at least, even that 20% though is still valuable, because you can start evaluating the post activity or tracked event to kind of feed back into that and build on that link percentage, if that makes sense. So if that could be 20% initially, but then you're starting to see the tracked behaviors with that in your overall conversation, so that link becomes stronger and stronger as that conversation starts building.
Very good. So I don't see any more question here for startup or for myself. So if you have, this is the time. Benny, I don't know if you want to answer a couple more questions, but if we're done, we can just kind of do the summary and leave you with some stirring thoughts.
Yeah, I think I'm out of questions on my end, but feel free to reach out if you have any additional follow-up questions to, again, benny.peng@ignitionone.com. But I do appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. And I also see a lot of questions, by the way, people asking whether the webinar, the recording is going to be shared, the presentation is going to be shared. So I'm assuming it is. I'll let the IAB talk about this in more detail. But that is something that we're also saying as well. So just some farewell thoughts from my end. We've been doing this for a long time, and one of the things that, again, from the data side, from the fragmented data side, we know is that data is fragmented, it is very dynamic. People think about data as something that's being static, but actually there's a term that's called data becoming bad. And it turns out that the numbers are actually quite high. So if you think about yourself, you change jobs, addresses, phone numbers, even your name. If you got married, you got divorced, you had kids, you're constantly changing. And it's really hard to glean who you are from just looking at one point here, one point there. And again, this is why the multi-signal approach, the ability to bring together different data signals, is so powerful. And similarly with IgnitionOne, I'll let Benny talk about it, the ability to bring in multiple devices and scoring is so powerful in today's fragmented ecosystem. So again, from startup, thank you all. And Benny, if you want to finish this.
Yeah, no, to recap, yeah, taking that data, understanding the customer, and making sure that you're having these engagements with your customers across wherever they may be. It could be on a display inventory or email inventory on their home computer or work computer across different devices, and just kind of linking all these different engagements into one cohesive end-to-end conversation with them. And then just in real time, understanding those likes and dislikes and the behaviors that you track across all these different engagements, and building on top of that so that you have a deep conversation with these people, so you can build those relationships over time with them, creating those long-term, higher value customers. Cool. Thank you so much, IAB. Thank you so much for everyone attending. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Sagi or myself.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.